I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast. Ted Bundy is one of America's most vile serial killers and sexual predators. Ted was active in Washington, Utah, Oregon, Idaho, Colorado, and Florida. Ted has been connected to 36 victims, but investigators believe the number is probably closer to 50 to 100 people. This is part 3 on Ted Bundy. If you haven't already, go start with part 1 and 2. So on part 2, we ended with Ted escaping from jail, then being caught again in the summer of 1977. There were physical similarities with the attacked women. All beautiful, long-haired women with hair parted down the middle. Most of the women were brunettes, but there were a couple blonde or strawberry blonde women. They did look similar to Diane, but it might have also been a coincidence with long parted hair was popular in the 70s. I would say, Paige, you would be the perfect subject for Ted. You part your hair down the middle, you're a brunette, and it's most of the time long. How do you feel about that?
I'm very concerned about that. Also, my hair is not straight down the middle. Sometimes it's, off to the side. Sometimes it's crooked as all get out.
I would like to state on record, I always part my hair on the side.
Do you really? Like, you're consistent with it?
Yeah, always. Like, my hair knows where I part my hair.
I switched sides. Last week it was crooked, almost like just zigzaggy. Like, it just went its own way and I just let it go. I don't even care. As long as it's laying flat, I don't care what the part looks like.
You remind me of my daughter. I'm like, let me just take the comb and just slice it on the top to make it a perfect straight line. And she's like, no, it's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. I do wear it long usually, but that's usually just so I can donate it. So it's shorter right now.
Props to you.
Boy, donating it. That's a doozy. It's a lot of hair.
I mean, the girls or the women that get your hair, they're probably very thankful. So you're doing a wonderful thing.
Thank you. I'm going to also pretend that hair does not look like Ted Bundy's victims. Because boy, is that disturbing.
Sorry I brought that to your attention. I just had to.
Something had also gone wrong or distracted the women before their murder. Linda Ann Haley had been sick. Donna Manson was suffering from depression. Susan Rancourt was alone on her college campus for the very first time. Kathy Parks was upset about her father's illness. Janice Ott was missing her husband. And Denise Noslin had been fighting with her boyfriend. The list goes on and on. Brenda Ball was worried about finding a ride home. Debbie Kent was concerned about her father's heart attack. Denise Oliverson had been fighting with her husband. Kimberly Leach was excited about being on the court for the Valentine's Day dance. And Georgianne Hawkins was worried about a Spanish test. Ted had written a letter to Liz prior to 1977 with his prison escape.
I have known people who, without saying a word, radiate vulnerability. Their facial expressions say, I'm afraid of you. These people invite abuse. I mean, dang, that holds quite a bit of truth to it. However, if Ted was here, I would like to say to him, I have known people too, without saying a word, that radiate evil. Mm-hmm. Their expressions say, I'll kill you or hunt you down. These people ignore the choice to be good and invite corruption into their own minds, ultimately destroying themselves.
Especially in Ted's case, it's really interesting to me that he says that these people invite abuse. I think he's so incredibly observant and he picks up on their emotions more than maybe their friends even do or their family does. Shark in the water, man.
And that I would probably be more of a target for Ted more because I am so vulnerable. I swear, I kid you not. I feel like I would be that type of person that would attract him to be abusive towards me in that aspect.
He's almost like an empath, right? Like he really senses others' emotions, but then instead of having that need to help somebody, he has the need to hurt them.
It's like flip-flopped.
Mm-hmm.
Like the wires were crisscrossed in his brain.
Something got crisscrossed in the brain. The Colorado and Utah murder investigations were continuing. In September, the Utah defense attorney requested to include the pubic hairs of Melissa Smith, head hairs from Karen Campbell, and Carol DeRanch found in Ted's Volkswagen in the Campbell murder trial. Ted went berserk, crying about the injustice of the situation. In November, the judge refused to allow the 3 other Utah cases, Debbie Kent, Lori Aim, and Melissa Smith, to be included in Karen's murder trial. The judge did rule to include Carol DeRanch's testimony and the ski brochure that Ted had kept with the marking of Wildwood Inn. Ted requested a change in venue due to bias. Everyone in Aspen knew his name. How would they find an unbiased jury? On December 23rd, the venue change was granted to Colorado Springs. Ted fought the venue, telling the judge that he was sentencing Ted to death. 3 of the 6 inmates on death row at the time had been from juries in Colorado Springs. 4 days later, the judge agreed to remove the death penalty from the table, but the venue would not change.
On December 30th, 1977, Ted would escape from jail again. He had memorized the jailer schedules and habits. Someone in the jail had provided Ted with a hacksaw blade. He used this hacksaw blade over a 6 to 8 week period to slowly saw around a metal plate in his cell ceiling. Working at night when the other prisoners were in the shower to hide the sound of the saw, he had removed the metal plate for a light fixture. Ted constantly complained about the Garfield County jail food, but it was a cover as he lost weight to fit in the 12 by 12 inch hole. He was down to 140 pounds.
Carol Ann helped Ted by smuggling in $500 cash and other items to help the escape.
If Carol Ann believed in Ted's innocence, wouldn't she have tried to talk him out of the escape? The advice here, Ted, is to stop trying to escape so you won't get more of a sentence.
Carol Ann really thinks that he's been framed and they're going to charge him with life in prison. So she thinks he's innocent. They're about to throw the book at him for crimes that he did not commit. So she's pro getting him out any means possible. Even in that prior June 1977 escape, they really suspect that Carol Ann had been helping him then as well too, like smuggling him things in to help him escape.
So she was trying to save his life.
Right.
Is where her mind was at. Okay.
Always, yep. During the last couple weeks of December, Ted had done tests of removing the plate, climbing into the attic area, and then eventually returning to his cell. The jail was empty, since the short-term prisoners were allowed to go home for the holidays, and the jail staff was out for the holiday as well. He knew that no one would check on him until lunch was served the next day. By routine, he always skipped breakfast, leaving his tray in the hallway until lunch. Ted placed books under his blanket to make it look as if he was still in bed. Then he climbed through the hole, crawled around on the cinder blocks above the jail, and he eventually found a hole in the ceiling. But it went into the jailer's apartment. Ted lingered in the ceiling while the jailer, Bob Morrison, had dinner, then made movie plans with his wife. The couple left the apartment, and Ted climbed down into their bedroom. He stole a gray turtleneck sweatshirt and jeans from the apartment.
Of course, a turtleneck. Freaking turtleneck.
I knew you were going to go for it. Turtleneck Ted. Then he walked right out the front door of the jailer's quarters and onto the street. He walked toward an apartment complex searching for a car with keys left inside. While searching for the car, it started snowing. Eventually, he found an old car that barely ran. The car had no second gear, heat, or reverse. Colorado was in the start of a blizzard by this time, and he was driving along in third and fourth gear, headed toward Vail. About halfway to Vail, the car died, and someone in a Mazda gave Ted a ride. When they made it to Vail around 2 a.m., the pass was closed. Can you imagine being that guy that picks Ted Bundy up in a snowstorm, pushes that dead car off the side of the road, and then says, "No problem, sir, hop on in, I'll take you to Vail"?
I wonder if he realized it after the fact, that was Ted Bundy.
Then just never comes forward. Just don't even say your name.
Like, I'm kind of embarrassed about this, but...
He's like, Nancy, look at what I did. I picked up a hitchhiker.
And she would think, he had a frickin' turtleneck on too? Like, what? What were you thinking?
Did he have a parka this time? Because he probably needed one.
Oh my gosh, anything to cover up that frickin' turtleneck.
The turtleneck.
Just cover it up.
Anything to stay warm in a blizzard.
Which is, it's so ironic that he would wear turtlenecks, but his victims, he would strangle them. Isn't that weird? That's a weird kind of look to it. Like, he would cover his neck always.
Ew.
But his victims, he would strangle their necks. I don't know.
So he's got a neck fetish?
Add that to the list.
It's getting dark. Yeah. Changing his plans at Vail, Ted took the bus to Denver, then caught a flight to Chicago.
Back at the jail, the breakfast tray was delivered to Ted's cell at 7 a.m. The jailer saw a lump in the bed and assumed it was Ted sleeping. By lunch, the jailer called Ted's name and didn't receive a response. It was discovered that Ted had escaped and had at least a 17-hour head start. Liz was notified by detectives that Ted had escaped and she was to notify them immediately if he contacted her. At Liz's request, they patrolled her neighborhood frequently and sent a plainclothes police officer to her home to discuss her safety. They decided Liz would open the blinds in her front window if she was in trouble. The FBI got involved when it became apparent that Ted had crossed state lines. They interviewed Liz and Molly. Liz told them that Ted would head for a university campus, and she turned out to be right.
From his flight into Chicago, Ted took a train to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Then he stole a car and drove to Atlanta, Georgia, before arriving at his destination in Tallahassee, Florida by bus. Good Lord, this is like planes, trains, and automobiles. I think he did everything except for steal a bike.
Apparently that's what you do when you run from the law.
Not anymore. You'd be better stealing the bicycle. Just bike it all the way over. Going by Chris Hagen, Ted signed a lease for a rooming house called The Oaks on January 8th, 1978. He kept to himself initially, just happy to be out of prison with intentions to be a law-abiding citizen. Ted couldn't stay on the straight and narrow for long, though. In fact, it would only be a week after he got off the bus in Florida before Ted would attack. Ted was in a bit of a bind for money. He had $90 a month rent and he needed food. Ted went through Florida State University records and found records of Kenneth Misner, who would be Ted's new identity. Then he actually did steal a bike, a new TV, food, and more cars than he can remember later. The Oaks room was just a couple blocks away from the Chi Omega sorority house.
On Saturday, January 14th, most of the sorority girls at the Chi Omega house were out late partying. Right next door to the house was a campus disco called Sherrod's. The combination lock on the rear door of the house was faulty in the days leading up to the attack. The girls were aware of the door malfunction and had been taking extra care to latch it. Mary Ann Picano was at Sherrod's when she started feeling uncomfortable about a man staring at her from across the room. Eventually, this man brought her a drink and asked her to dance. Before walking away, Mary Ann told her roommate that she was pretty sure she was about to dance with an ex-con. The man, Ted, didn't harm Mary Ann in any way, but her instincts were telling her to get out of there. When she looked for Ted later, she couldn't find him.
With the amount of women in the sorority house coming and going, it was easy to timestamp the events of the early morning hours of January 15th. 21-year-old Margaret Bowman had a blind date at 9:30 p.m. on the evening of the 14th. She was waiting in the rec room for her friend Melanie when Melanie arrived back home a little after 2 a.m. They talked until the alarm clock in Margaret's room read 2:35 a.m. Melanie headed to the bathroom, then was in her own room at 2:45 a.m. 20-year-old Lisa Levy had worked at her part-time job, then decided to go to Sherrod's at 10 p.m. with her sorority sister Melanie. Lisa stayed at the disco for about half an hour, then decided she was tired and walked back to the house alone. Her roommate was gone for the weekend.
Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner were roommates in room number 8. Karen had gone to her parents' home for dinner, then returned to her room to work on a sewing project until around midnight. Kathy had attended a wedding, then returned to her room. Both women ended up in bed asleep by midnight. At 3 a.m., another housemate named Nita came to the back door and found it wide open. Everyone was aware of the door issue, so she wasn't overly concerned, but like the woman ahead of her, she attempted to close it until it latched. Once inside, though, Nita heard a loud thump, then someone running down the stairs. A man went out the front door, carrying a log that looked like a club.
After Nita saw a man leaving the house, she crept up the stairs in time for Karen to come out of her room, staggering down the hallway and holding her head. She was covered in blood. Kathy was sitting on her bed with blood rushing down her head. Ted selected an oak log from a pile in the backyard, then entered the house through the faulty back door, climbed the steps, and selected a room at random. He found Margaret Bowman's room first, where he beat and strangled her to death. Margaret would be found lying on her face. She had been beaten so badly that her skull was shattered and the officer could see her brain. A nylon stocking had been tied around her neck. There was tree bark everywhere.
That has to be hard to see. Like, part of her brain.
When the sorority sisters realize something's wrong, they call 911 and there's like a miscommunication, like that it was a boyfriend beating up his girlfriend. There was some kind of like a domestic disturbance type situation. And the police officer, when he gets there and realizes what has happened and he calls for backup, he's later quoted saying like, "Oh my gosh, it was so wrong. And we had no idea what we were going into." Like they were going into it completely blind, thinking it was something completely different than it was. And it was just devastating to them. Like how much they wish it had just been a domestic abuse situation, not a mass murder.
So Ted then went to Lisa Levy's room. He beat her with the log and strangled her. He left a bite mark on her butt and her right nipple had been almost bitten off. She had been raped with a hairspray bottle. Even though the paramedics did not find a pulse initially, they still tried CPR and administered drugs to, in theory, keep her heart beating while she was rushed to the hospital. Lisa would be pronounced dead on arrival. Roommates Karen and Kathy would be the final two victims at the Chi Omega house that night. The roommates had been asleep when Ted entered the room and beat them both on the head with a log. Both women had multiple injuries to their head and faces. Neither would remember their attacker. Karen had a concussion, broken jaw, bone fractures, and a crushed finger. Kathy had a broken jaw and deep cuts on her shoulder. All of Kathy's lower teeth were permanently loosened, and she required surgery to place a pin in her jaw.
The entire attack happened within 15 minutes. Melanie was in Margaret's room at 2:35 a.m. Melody had gone back and forth in the hallway until 2:45 a.m. Another girl, Carol, had come home at 2:55 a.m. and went upstairs to find all of the lights out, which was very unusual. Carol went to her room, changed into her pajamas, then walked back down the unlit hallway to the bathroom. While in the bathroom brushing her teeth, she heard someone walking on the creaking floorboards outside the bathroom. Assuming it was another sorority sister, she went out of the bathroom and down the hallway to her room. Carol would have missed Ted by seconds. Then Nita arrived at 3 a.m. and saw Ted leaving. Later, the 35 other women in the house would speculate that Ted had staked out the house the afternoon before the murder. For one reason or another, every person who lived in that house was out of the house that afternoon. There was also a room plan posted in the foyer showing which people were in which room number, which would have helped Ted navigate the house.
It seems weird that it took only 15 minutes. Like, what are these, 4 women that got attacked?
Yep.
15 minutes seems like too quick of a time for him to do what he did and out of there. It just doesn't seem possible. And it just goes to show you, like, something can happen instantly. And it's just, it can happen so quick. And it's not fair.
It was so fast. I do agree with what they think about him staking it out. If he had gone in, seen the room plan, he would have had a much quicker, more efficient time in knowing exactly where people were instead of wandering around and opening doors.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to eat up a lot of that 15 minutes as opposed to knowing, you know, this room has one person, this one has 2 people. This is where the rooms are all, you know, like basically a blueprint of the house is what he saw when he went in there.
Mm-hmm.
After killing 2 women and attacking 2 others, Ted was in a frenzy, and there would be one more attack before the night was over. He ran a couple of blocks down Dunwoody Street and stopped at a duplex rented by friends at 431 Dunwoody. Cheryl Thomas rented apartment B, and her two friends, Debbie and Nancy, lived next door in apartment A. All three women attended Florida State University. The duplex was a converted single-family home with a shared wall between Unit A and Unit B. By 3 a.m., Debbie and Nancy were asleep. At 4 a.m., Debbie woke to hear a loud thumping sound that seemed to be coming from beneath the house. Nancy slept in the same bedroom as Debbie on a mattress on the floor. Debbie woke Nancy and they listened to the thumping. Then it stopped and they could hear Cheryl moaning through the wall. The friends had a security check. They would answer their phone no matter the time. So Debbie and Nancy called Cheryl. Through the wall, they could hear the phone ringing and ringing, but Cheryl didn't answer. Debbie called the police at 4:37 a.m. and gave the address. As she was calling the police, they heard a crash from Cheryl's apartment that sounded like it came from the kitchen, and then the sound of someone running. Within 3 or 4 minutes, 12 police officers arrived at the duplex. To Debbie and Nancy, this seemed like a quick arrival for so many police officers, but they didn't know about the Chi Omega attack just 0.2 of a mile away.
Ted had entered the apartment through the kitchen window. Like so many of his other victims, Cheryl had long dark hair that was parted down the middle. It would also appear that Ted had been watching Cheryl in the days before the attack. He had left the sorority house and ran straight to her apartment. Cheryl would be beaten. Her skull was fractured in 5 places. Her jaw was broken and her shoulder dislocated. Her 8th cranial nerve was damaged, causing her not only to be deafened in her left ear, but also resulting in loss of equilibrium. Like Karen and Kathy, she has no memory of her attacker. A handmade pantyhose mask with 2 hairs in it was found in Cheryl's room.
In addition to having Ted's hair, this mask could also be an almost exact match as the one found in Ted's VW during the 1975 burglary arrest. Law enforcement tested the bedding of Lisa, Margaret, Karen, and Kathy for semen, but none was found. There was semen found on the bottom of Cheryl's bedsheet. The bite mark on Lisa's butt was actually more than just a bite. Ted had bitten twice, both times wrenching his head away like an animal attack. The teeth marks in Lisa's skin were saved as evidence. Ted stole a Florida State University van and license plate from a neighbor of Cheryl Thomas. Then he drove 200 miles to Jacksonville, Florida, and attempted to lure girls into the van.
I just think of Twilight when I hear Jacksonville, Florida.
Because of what's where Renee lives? Jacksonville?
Yes. My mom lived in Jacksonville. Her new boyfriend. Or whatever.
Phil? Yeah, no. I was literally just watching Eclipse the other day.
I do like Eclipse. Eclipse was a good one.
The movies suck, but...
They do suck.
The books were good.
Breaking Dawn Part 2 was where it's at, though. I really liked that one. They ended it well.
They did.
The CGI, though, baby,
is bad.
It bothered me.
Yeah.
But every other part, it was fine.
Once you get past the acting and how stiff and weird it was, yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
That's just Kristen Stewart. That's how she normally acts. On Wednesday, February 8th, 14-year-old Leslie Ann Parmenter left her school and walked to the Kmart parking lot while waiting for her brother Danny to pick her up. Danny and Leslie were children of a Jacksonville Police Department chief. A white van pulled up beside Leslie, and Ted jumped out, blocking her way. Ted was wearing a fire department badge and introduced himself as Richard Burton. He said that someone told him that she went to school across the street, and he wanted to know if she was going to Kmart. Leslie would say later that he didn't look like a fireman, and he had a weird look in his eye. She tried to walk around him, but Ted kept blocking her path. Miraculously, it had started to rain, and Danny got off work from his construction job early. He arrived in time to see Ted blocking Leslie's path. Danny parked and told Leslie to get in his car, then started to question Ted. Ted muttered that he was just asking about Leslie's name and then drove off. Danny followed, and they wrote down the van's license plate number. The van was marked with the number 13, which their father knew it meant from Tallahassee. He knew something wasn't right about the situation. Detective Parmenter called Tallahassee on the afternoon of February 9th, but it was too late.
On February 9th, 1978, Kimberly Leach would go missing from her junior high school. She had forgotten her purse in her 7th grade homeroom class. Her friend had seen Kim being beckoned over or lured into a white van. A fire department lieutenant saw Ted walking a crying Kim to the van, but assumed it was an angry parent picking up his daughter at school. The school attendant's office called Kim's parents in the afternoon to ask if she was sick. Her mother had driven Kim to school that morning and was concerned to hear that Kim wasn't at school.
She was crying on the way to the van. That completely shattered me. She must have been so scared.
I would imagine he probably told her there was some kind of a family emergency, and that's what convinced her into getting in the car. Something that was like, very urgent, we need to go, something happened, and she's upset about it, but she follows him into the car, not realizing it's a lie.
Or he could have threatened her and said, if you don't come with me, I'll kill your mom or your dad.
Possible.
Detective Parmenter called the Leon County Sheriff Department to report the incident with Leslie. It was quickly put together that the van and license plate had both been stolen, and now there was a missing person lookout for Kimberly Leach. Danny and Leslie underwent hypnosis. When it got to a description of Ted's face, Leslie got hysterical and couldn't describe his face. She had to be brought out of the hypnosis, but was able to help with a composite sketch. Danny and Leslie were both able to select Ted from a pile of mugshots.
But the mugshot must not have included Ted's name because Florida investigators still didn't know Ted's name or who to contact for more information. Back in Tallahassee on February 11th at 1:47 a.m., an unmarked police officer came across Ted trying to get into a Toyota car. When questioned about the early hour, Ted said that he was parked on campus and forgot a book in his car, so he walked back to get it. The key in Ted's hand did open the car door, which is lucky for Ted there since it initially looked like he was trying to break into the car. But the officer then spotted a license tag under a pile of papers on the floor. It was the stolen license plate from Cheryl's neighbor and used on the stolen van. The officer was calling in the plate when Ted bolted. He jumped over a retaining wall into the Oaks' backyard and disappeared. The next day, the officer heard about the white Dodge stolen van and realized there had been a van matching the description parked behind the Toyota. When he returned, the van was gone.
Ted ditched the van and moved out of the Oaks on February 12th. He wiped down every surface. Not a single of his fingerprints would be found later. The white van would be found on February 13th and sent for police processing. Again, all of Ted's fingerprints had been wiped clean.
It's almost like he wore gloves the whole time because they found 57 prints, but they were all employees. So there were prints, just none of Ted's.
Who exactly said he wiped the van down? Was that a confession Ted made later on?
No, I think it was just an assumption because there was no fingerprints of his.
Okay. The rear of the van had 2 large bloodstains and drag marks. Something heavy had been dragged on the carpet. Fibers from Kim's football jersey and Ted's blue blazer would be found later in the van.
Ted stole an orange VW Beetle with keys in it, using another stolen license tag.
Really, Ted? Another Volkswagen Beetle? Drives me nuts with this.
He's got a thing. Just like in Utah, Ted would be caught by a police officer who knew his area very well. Working the 8P to 4A shift, Officer David Lee saw a Volkswagen Bug pull out of an alley behind a restaurant at 1:30 a.m. on February 15th. David knew that the restaurant closed at 10 p.m. on Tuesdays, and he also knew all of the employee vehicles. Pulling behind the Volkswagen, David ran the plates, and they came back stolen. Instead of pulling over, Ted sped away and led David on a mile-long police chase. Ted would eventually pull over, but didn't intend to go down without a fight. Once outside of the car, Ted kicked David's feet out from under him. They struggled until David eventually overcame Ted and handcuffed him. Ted was yelling for help during the struggle. David would say in court,
"I was hoping there was help coming for me. Some guy came out of his house and asked me what I was doing to the man on the ground. I was in uniform, too."
Ted gave his name as Kenneth Raymond Misner. Kenneth happened to have 3 complete sets of identifications, 21 stolen credit cards, a stolen TV, a stolen car, and a stolen license plate. Ted refused to give his real identity, continually signing Ken Misner even after the real Ken Misner was found.
I would love to see Ted's reaction when they would have presented that to him. They were like, "Listen, we found the real Ken Misner, and it's not you."
They were able to find the real Ken, But they couldn't connect the dots on the mugshot to Ted Bundy?
No, because it was an unnamed mugshot, right?
Who passes out unidentified mugshots?
How does it get passed out? It's just like
How
it's
does it
put
go
into
from-
a stack.
Right, from Washington or Colorado all the way to Florida. So somebody mailed just a picture of his mugshot and didn't write like Ted Bundy on it.
Someone definitely should have got fired around there.
Or at least been like, can you put a label on there that says Bundy? Contact Colorado State Police, something.
On February 16th, Liz received a call from Ted. He had been arrested in Pensacola and had made a deal with police to hold off on announcing his arrest until the following morning so he could talk to his family. Liz specifically asked if he had been involved in the Florida sorority murders, but he just said it was going to be bad. The Florida police didn't know who they had arrested, and part of Ted's deal was that he finally told investigators who he was. A couple of days later, Ted would call Liz at 2 a.m. He had been talking to a priest and decided to take responsibility for the pain he had caused. He admits to Liz that he was sick, and for the first time, Liz truly believed that Ted was a murderer.
Ted does attempt murdering Liz multiple times, and he tells her about one occasion when Liz had passed out drunk. Ted had closed the damper on the chimney, so the smoke couldn't go up the chimney, and put a towel under the crack in the door. Ted woke Liz up to tell her the fireplace was stuck and he was going to grab a fan from his apartment. Then he left her. Luckily, Liz woke up and threw open a window. Throughout Liz's autobiography, The Phantom Prince, there are multiple times that she just mentions weird situations or feelings that she had just in passing. While out on the river one day, Ted pushed Liz off their raft into the water and had a blank look on his face when Liz yelled at him about it. In 1973, when Ted convinced Liz into trying bondage, he had tied her to the bed, then during sex started to choke her until she panicked and he stopped. Plus, there was the time when they had stopped at that scenic overlook in Wyoming. Let's be honest, there were probably many more times than Liz knew that she was in danger.
I mean, I would say opening the door and finding like the towel that he tried to like stuff under there, it would signify for me, okay, he tried to kill me.
How did this towel get here? And she remembers being so drunk that she just kind of like opens her eyes and he's like, hey, the chimney's stuck. I'm going to go grab a fan. And then he never comes back. And at some point she wakes up and is like, oh my gosh, like there's so much smoke in this room, and manages to get the window open. But it's just a really strange situation. And she does yell at him about it later, and he makes some kind of like non-committal response. And then that's it. Like they just move on. And there's so many times in that book that it's that exact situation. Like, oh, he just went to go get a fan and then never came back. And that's fine, right? Like that's okay.
Just gonna brush it off. It's okay.
He just shoved me off the raft and then didn't help me get back on. But that's fine. It's cool. Everything's good here.
He said his hand slipped. It wasn't a push.
Right.
Ted would actually be interviewed for hours. When discussing his 36 suspected murders, Ted reportedly said,
add 1 digit to that and you'll have it.
Investigators still don't know if he meant 136 or 37. He also mentioned there were murders in 6 states.
We know of Washington, Idaho, Colorado, Utah, and Florida. That's only 5 states. So there's another unsolved murder out there from another state. He could have also meant any combination. Like what if he meant 236 victims or any number of 3-digit combinations as well?
I would think that number would be way too high.
I think 236 is too high.
Yeah, there would have been more missing people if it was that number, I would feel like.
I agree. I think it's maybe closer to 136 because he does travel throughout the United States. And one of his Republican jobs, he was literally traveling the state. So these women could be anywhere, maybe just in one state, but I think it's probably farther than we think it is.
Ted told law enforcement,
I am the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet.
He would be charged with multiple counts of auto theft, burglary, credit card theft, and forgery. He was the main suspect for the Chi Omega attack, Cheryl Thompson attack, and the abduction of Kimberly Leach. Florida took no chances with Ted. Every single time that he was outside his cell, he was required to wear handcuffs, chains, and a leg brace from his foot to thigh. When a reporter asked Ted about the leg brace, he laughed and said it was because he ran too fast. On February 18th, Ted was driven from Pensacola to Tallahassee. In the first week of March, Ted was charged with 34 counts of forgery and $290.82 credit card theft. Ted was also fighting the order to provide samples of his hair, blood, and saliva.
The search continued for Kim Leach, but without much hope that she would still be found alive. Her remains would be found on April 7th. Leaves from the undercarriage of the stolen Dodge van were analyzed, and it was determined that the leaves came from somewhere close to the North Florida River. A 40-person search team worked through the 90-degree day searching off the I-10. On foot for the first time, the search team found a very small shed. Looking through a hole on the side, they found a tennis shoe and a jersey with the number 83 on it, the same clothes that Kim had been wearing at the time of her disappearance. That year, Florida had been hot and dry. Kim's remains were almost mummified. Her skull was not fractured, but something had penetrated her neck, possibly a knife. There were signs of sexual battery, but it was unclear if she was alive at the time. Semen had been found in her underwear. Due to the amount of blood and drag marks, it appeared that Kim was placed in the shed after her death.
Wasn't the other, basically, child that he murdered, he didn't bludgeon her?
Lynette?
Yeah, he didn't bludgeon her either. He drowned her in the bathtub.
Correct.
Same goes with Kim here. He didn't hit her on the skull. She had no skull fractures.
Right.
He killed her in a different way than his normal MO, which is weird to me.
Yeah, he doesn't strangle either of them, which is unique, I suppose, that they were both young women, pre-teen aged girls that were killed differently. Like maybe he didn't want to put his hands around their necks.
Maybe they were easily manipulated, or, the older women, they knew what was happening right away. Whereas to, these kids, these girls, these children were like, they were playing along, basically. Well, they weren't playing along, but Ted was making them play along.
Also, probably easier for Ted to overpower them.
Yeah.
So maybe there's less risk involved for him.
It's just so sad.
I know. And on the flip side, you think it would also be more risk because investigators are going to look for a child much faster than they would an adult woman who could have walked away.
Yep. On April 27th, a warrant was issued for Ted's dental records. Investigators were working to confirm his teeth matched the bite marks on Lisa Levy. The warrant was issued with short notice for Ted, and they were afraid he would try to grind down his teeth. Ted completely lost it, saying they couldn't do that without his attorney. They showed Ted the warrant and the devices they could use on him to obtain the sample by force if needed. Ted suddenly became calm and agreeable, saying to the sheriff that they didn't need to use force because he's not a violent person.
Geez, Sheriff, he's just a chill guy that doesn't need force. Jeez.
Come on, right? Not.
Shows you how quick his personality can change, though.
Instant. Ted was being held in isolation at the Leon County Jail. Taking no risks, he was not allowed around other prisoners. His light fixture and the ceiling were both out of reach as well. There were no windows from his cell, and extra locks had been installed on the door.
At 9:30 p.m. on July 27th, Ted would be indicted at a recorded press conference. Sheriff Ken Kataris read the indictment while Ted continued to interrupt and be snarky. Ted was charged with the assault of Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, murder of Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, and the attempted murder of Cheryl Thomas. Ted pleaded not guilty right there in the press conference. Just days later, on July 31st, Ted would be charged with the first-degree murder and kidnapping of Kimberly Leach. Ted would also plead not guilty to the murder of Kim. And this, guys, is where we're stopping for part 3. So stay tuned. We'll be back for part 4, the finale. We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation, and we'll announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye!
Bye!